Sometimes life teaches us its most unforgettable lessons in the unlikeliest of places, not in the halls of government or the stages of the powerful, but in the quiet corners of ordinary life where simple choices can ignite extraordinary change. And this story begins not in a courtroom or a battlefield, but in a small town diner, a place where truckers stop for black coffee, where locals gather for gossip, and where trouble unexpectedly arrived one Saturday morning in the form of five loud leather-clad bikers who swaggered through the door wearing the kind of false confidence that bullies wear when they believe the world belongs to them and everyone else is merely there to be pushed aside and controlled. But what they did not know, what they could not have imagined, was that seated quietly in the corner booth, sipping her tea, was a woman named Sarah Mitchell, who did not look like a threat, who did not announce her presence, but whose calm gaze and steady breath hid a history few could claim because Sarah was not just another customer. She was a decorated Force Recon Marine, a veteran who had survived combat zones harsher than any bar fight, who had faced fear sharper than any blade, and who understood the true measure of strength was not in muscle or noise, but in patience, discipline, and knowing exactly when to act. And what unfolded in that diner that day would become not only the turning point of these bikers' lives, but also the spark of a movement that would reach far beyond their small town, rippling across states and oceans in ways no one could have predicted. This is why you must watch until the end, because this is not just a story of a fight. It is a story of transformation, of how courage met arrogance and changed it forever. And perhaps by the time this tale is done, you will see how small acts of bravery can light fires of change that burn far brighter than fists or fury. Now let's pause for a moment and think about what courage really looks like, because in most action stories, we are told that heroes are obvious. They stand tall, they wear capes, they make speeches. But in real life, courage often sits quietly unnoticed, like Sarah reading her newspaper, while trouble strolled in. Because heroes in the real world do not seek attention. They wait, they prepare, they listen, and when needed, they act without hesitation. And this is what makes Sarah's story matter, because she represents not just herself, but every person who quietly holds strength beneath the surface. Every veteran, every survivor, every protector who carries skill not to dominate but to defend. In this distinction matters because so many people confuse aggression with power, noise with importance. The bikers who entered that diner that day believed they ruled the room because they were loud, because they were feared, because people stepped aside. But true power does not shout. True power does not need an audience. And when they challenged Sarah, they discovered this truth the hard way. But more on that in a moment. First, let's understand why these bikers acted the way they did. Because their story too has lessons worth learning. They were members of the Steel Vipers, once a feared outlaw group, now broken into small, desperate bands, trying to reclaim lost glory through intimidation and cheap threats. But beneath the tattoos and growls were men like Razor, their leader whose life had once held promise, whose younger years had dreamed of racing, not bullying, and Tommy, a former soldier who had lost his way after leaving the army, looking for brotherhood and finding only emptiness in leather jackets and bar fights. These men were not born villains. They were shaped by failure, by loss, by the hunger for respect in a world that had offered them none. And this is important because when we see bullies, we often forget to see the broken people inside them. Not to excuse their cruelty, but to understand its roots, because every act of violence begins with fear. Every threat is a mask for weakness, and on that day in the diner, their fear met Sarah's calm, and the result would change them forever. It began when they harassed a young mother trying to feed her children, mocking her nervously, glancing at her terrified son, tossing ketchup packets across her table. And the waitress too, a young woman named Lily, trembling as they leered and laughed. But Sarah watched silent, calculating, measuring the threat like the Marine she had been. And when Razor pushed Lily's tray, sending food tumbling, Sarah stood slowly, quietly, without drama, without rage, and walked toward the bikers, her voice low and firm enough. Put the tray down. Apologize. The room froze. The bikers sneered, "Who's going to make us you?" Grandma Razor smirked, and then, without warning, without wasted motion, Sarah moved a step, a turn, a twist, and Razor's wrist was pinned, his body locked, his breath caught, because skill, not strength, wins fights. And Sarah's years of training made his muscles useless, and the diner gasped as Razor gasped too, realizing that he had made a terrible mistake. And in moments, the other bikers found themselves disarmed, flipped, pinned, not harmed, but held helpless, as Sarah's quiet force dismantled their bravado like paper and water, and the phone cameras flashed and the world began to watch. And soon that video would race across the internet, millions seeing the moment when arrogance met quiet skill and fell. But this was not the real victory, because Sarah did not humiliate them. She did not gloat. She spoke quietly of choices, of shame, of change. And this struck something deeper in Razor and Tommy and the others, because somewhere buried beneath years of pride and fear, they remembered honor. They remembered better days. And this is where the story turns from action to transformation, because the real battle was not fought in punches, but in hearts, in the decision these men now faced to remain what they had become or to become something new. And this is why Sarah matters, because she did not destroy them, she awakened them, and what came next would surprise the world. But what happened after that quiet but stunning moment in the diner was even more important than the confrontation itself, because this was the part no one expected. Not the officers who arrived moments later, not the customers still holding their breath, not even the bikers themselves who now sat quietly at a table staring at their hands like boys who had been caught breaking windows. Because when the video of the incident exploded online, drawing millions of views and reactions from veterans communities, martial artists, self-defense experts, and ordinary citizens, who all praised Sarah's calm skill and restraint, the focus shifted from the shock of the event to the question of what would happen next, because Sarah made a choice that few in her position would have made. She refused to press charges. She declined to see the bikers jailed or ruined. Instead, she asked a question that stunned the room. What made you this way? And that question hung in the air, heavier than any punch, because it was not an accusation, it was an invitation to truth. And for the first time in years, Razor, the leader of the Steel Vipers, who had spent so long building his image as a feared enforcer, hesitated, lowered his eyes, and spoke the truth about the fear of fading, the fear of being nothing, of being forgotten as the world moved on without him. Tommy, the youngest, who once served in the army, admitted he missed the brotherhood, the purpose, the meaning he once had before life dumped him into bars and debt and lost friends. And in these broken words, the real story began to emerge. The story beneath the leather and the noise, the story of men who had been lost long before they entered that diner. And this is why Sarah's choice mattered so much, because she saw this truth not with pity, but with clarity. The clarity of a veteran who had seen young soldiers return from war, lost and unsure, the clarity of a woman who knew the cost of pain left unspoken and wounds left unhealed. And this moment, this choice to see beyond the threat, changed everything, because instead of dragging the Steel Vipers to court or humiliation, she offered them a different path to become something better, to reclaim the honor they had buried under fear and anger. And this was no soft forgiveness. This was not weakness. This was the hardest path of all, the path of redemption, and it would demand everything from these men, but also offer something they thought they had lost a chance to matter for real. And this idea took root because the veterans groups who saw the video reached out offering help and counsel, and Big Mike, a legendary figure in the legitimate motorcycle community, heard the story and came in person to the diner to talk to Razor and Tommy and the others, to remind them what a real MC could be, not a gang of fear, but a brotherhood of service, a force for good. And slowly, carefully, the plan for something new began to form. The Phoenix Riders, a name chosen by the men themselves to mark the death of the old life and the birth of the new. And this name mattered because in every culture, the phoenix is the symbol of rebirth, of fire and ash, and rising again, stronger, wiser. And these men needed that symbol because they knew the world was watching, that every camera, every blog, every comment online expected them to fail, to return to their old ways, to prove that men like them could not change. They were determined to prove the world wrong, and Sarah agreed to help, not as a leader, but as a guide, offering her insight, her discipline, her experience to shape this fragile new dream. And what followed was nothing short of remarkable, because the Phoenix Riders grew fast, drawing not only reformed Steel Vipers, but veterans looking for purpose, former gang members seeking escape, young men at risk of falling into crime. And they found in the Phoenix Riders not just bikes to ride, but workshops to fix engines, jobs to learn skills to build, and most of all, a place to belong without fear or shame. And this belonging mattered more than anything, because it healed the quiet wounds that had driven them to violence in the first place. And this is the part of the story that reminds us of real-life examples like Homeboy Industries in Los Angeles, where ex-gang members learn trades and rebuild lives, or the Veterans Garage in Chicago, where combat vets fix cars and find community, or the Warrior Retreats, where PTSD survivors share stories and find peace. Because when men and women broken by fear and anger are given purpose, not pity, when they are trusted with work, not watched with suspicion, they rise, they change, they become what they were meant to be. And this is what happened to the Phoenix Riders, because they did not only fix bikes, they fixed each other, teaching young apprentices from the neighborhood, offering free repairs for widows of veterans, raising money for children's hospitals, riding in honor guards for fallen soldiers. And these acts of service slowly burned away the old shame, the old rage, the old fear, until even Razor stood proud before his daughter, who once asked him why he was so angry and now hugged him tight at the charity rally, smiling because her father was a hero, not a bully. And Tommy found joy not in beer and fights, but in mentoring a young man who reminded him of himself at 19, lost but willing to learn. And this change spread beyond the riders, because the town itself began to change. People who once locked their doors when bikes roared past now waved, smiled. Trusted shop owners welcomed the riders to their businesses, knowing the old ways were gone. And in this small way, the shadow of fear that had hung over the town for years began to lift. And the news carried this story across the nation, inspiring other clubs to reach out to reform, to learn to follow the path that the Phoenix Riders had blazed. And this mattered deeply because it showed the country that even the hardest men could change, that even the darkest past could become light, that even the worst mistakes could lead to new life. And this is the lesson that too many forget, that redemption is not weakness, that grace is not foolishness, that second chances are the building blocks of peace. And this is why Sarah's choice to forgive, to offer a path to trust, not vengeance, was the greatest victory of all, greater than any takedown in the diner, greater than any viral video, because she turned enemies into brothers, fear into purpose, danger into hope. And in doing so, she proved what every real warrior knows, that the greatest battle is not against others, but against the anger and fear within. And this battle was won not with fists, but with faith. And because of this victory, the world would never be quite the same. But even as the Phoenix Riders grew stronger, as the town learned to trust again, as the news spread and letters of support poured in from across the country, there were those who watched this transformation with anger, with jealousy, with fear, because not every biker gang wanted peace. Not every outlaw club was willing to change. And in the shadowed corners of the region, rival gangs whispered that the Phoenix Riders had gone soft, had betrayed the old ways, had sold out their fearsome name for charity and community. And so the threats began, quiet at first. Crude graffiti scrawled on the walls of the Phoenix Riders' new garage. Slashed tires, broken windows, and then bolder moves. Strangers lurking outside the homes of riders' families, phones ringing with threats whispered in the dark. And this danger was real, because when old power feels threatened, it fights back, as history shows us, from the mafia's war on community reformers in New York to the Ku Klux Klan's terror campaigns against civil rights. Leaders to the gangs of Los Angeles who tried to kill former members turned activists, because violence resists change with desperation. And so the Phoenix Riders faced a choice: fight back the old way, fists for fists, fire for fire, or stand firm in their new path of peace. And here Sarah's wisdom proved most vital, because she reminded them that the world was watching, that the choice they made now would define their legacy forever. So they chose restraint. They chose resolve. They chose to meet vandalism with repair threats, with calm presence, fear with steady eyes. And this choice turned the tide, because the town rallied behind them. Volunteers arrived to clean paint, fix guard, local businesses offered camera supply support, because the Phoenix Riders had become not outlaws, but defenders, not feared strangers, but beloved protectors. And this solidarity mattered more than any fight, because it broke the old pattern of fear and violence. and built something new: community trust, courage, and unity. And this choice was tested when the rival gang struck hardest, breaking into the Riders' garage, stealing tools, trashing machines, trying to shatter the dream. But again, the Phoenix Riders rebuilt, fixed what was broken, replaced what was lost. And this patience, this refusal to fall into rage, inspired even their enemies. Because rumors spread that some members of the rival gang questioned their leaders, ashamed of the cowardly attacks, wondering if they too could change. And this is the secret power of nonviolence, of steadfast peace. It not only protects the innocent, it corrodes the will of the wicked. It forces the oppressor to see their own weakness. And so the attacks slowly faded. The threats died down, and in their place, curiosity came: calls from other struggling biker groups asking how the Phoenix Riders had made this new life. And so the movement grew beyond the town to other states and cities, to other countries where veterans and bikers and lost young men sought purpose and place. In Japan, the first Phoenix Riders chapter opened, helping former Yakuza members find work and dignity in motorcycle repair. In the UK, ex-football hooligans joined British veterans in forming a riders group that patrolled neighborhoods for safety, not trouble. In Australia, former gang members became wildfire fighters on motorcycles, saving forests and homes. And in South Korea, the Phoenix Riders partnered with retired police and military to teach defensive driving to young bikers. And this international spread amazed even Sarah and Big Mike, who never dreamed their quiet act of courage in a small American diner would ripple across oceans into other cultures and lives. But this is the nature of truth when lived openly. It crosses every border when spoken bravely. It breaks every wall. And this is why the Phoenix Riders became a model recognized by global leaders, honored at international conferences, praised by peace organizations, even discussed at the United Nations as an example of post-conflict reintegration, because it showed what experts had long argued: that purpose is the best cure for violence, that community is the best weapon against gangs, that dignity is the deepest hunger of every human heart. And yet the Riders knew they could not rest, because the struggle against fear and hate is never over, as history teaches, from South Africa's Truth Commissions to Ireland's peace accords to the long fight for reconciliation in Rwanda, because wounds of violence run deep and heal slow. So the Riders kept riding, kept teaching, kept reaching out, especially to the young, to the restless boys who stood where they once stood, ready to fall into anger unless shown another way. And this youth work became their greatest mission: riding into schools, speaking at youth centers, offering apprenticeships to troubled teens. Because if the next generation could learn peace early, the old cycle could finally break. And these efforts bore fruit. Young men who once tagged walls and carried knives now fixed engines and built bikes, smiling, proud, strong. And the town changed again, safer, brighter, more hopeful, because its sons no longer vanished into gangs, but built futures with grease-stained hands and clean hearts. And this is the real triumph of the Phoenix Riders, not in the media praise or the awards or the conferences, but in these boys who will never know the prison cell or the grave. Because Sarah and the Riders chose grace, not revenge, and this lesson matters for every city, every country. Because everywhere there are lost youth hungry for purpose, and if they are not fed with hope, they will feast on fear. And this truth is old as time, seen in the street kids of Rio, the child soldiers of Africa, the gang recruits of Chicago. And yet the answer is always the same: give them purpose, give them work, give them worth, and they will rise. And this is what the Phoenix Riders proved, and what their story now teaches the world. And it began with one quiet woman and one quiet choice: to stand, to speak, to see, not the threat, but the wounded soul beneath. And this is the power each of us holds, not to save the world alone, but to change one moment, one life, and so change the world forever. But as the Phoenix Riders' reputation grew, as their story spread from city to city, from country to country, something even greater began to unfold. Something that reached far beyond motorcycles and veterans and biker gangs. Something that touched the very soul of how societies heal and how enemies become brothers. Because the transformation that began in that small-town diner sparked a wider movement of reconciliation that no one could have predicted. And this was the quiet miracle behind the headlines that former rivals, former enemies began to talk to, reach out to wonder if they too could lay down their grudges, their anger, their fear, and find peace. And this was not fantasy. It was real, seen in the rival biker clubs that once fought bitterly, now hosting joint charity rides in the former street gangs of Chicago, who called the Phoenix Riders for guidance in the cities of Europe, where refugee youth and native-born rivals found common cause fixing broken bikes and broken friendships. And this was because the Phoenix Riders carried no pride, no arrogance. They came not as saints, but as men who knew failure, who had lived darkness, and so they spoke with the voice of experience, not judgment. And this voice was heard even by their old enemies, because the gang that had once vandalized their garage came in secret, came ashamed, came seeking a way out. And Sarah and Big Mike and the riders welcomed them with open hands because they knew the deepest truth of all, that those who hate most deeply are those most afraid, most lost. And these lost men became apprentices, friends, brothers. And in this act, the last enemy fell, and the old circle of violence broke. And this matters because it is rare in human history for such change to come not by force, but by grace. Yet it is the way true peace is made, as seen in the Truth Commissions of South Africa, where killers confessed and victims forgave, in the post-war rebuilding of Bosnia, where soldiers laid bricks beside those they once fought, and now here in a quiet town of America, where bikers once feared became bikers, now loved, respected, honored. This respect spread to the wider world. The Phoenix Riders invited to veteran events, to peace summits, to government consultations, because their model was simple and strong. Give the angry man a purpose, and his anger dissolves. Give the broken man a craft, and his pride returns. Give the feared man a brotherhood of good, and his fear fades. In this model now shaped programs in prisons, where inmates rebuilt bicycles for poor children, in shelters, where the homeless repaired scooters to earn dignity, in army bases, where struggling veterans learned motorcycle restoration to ease the wounds of war. And this work mattered because it saved lives, not with medicine, but with meaning. And this is the deepest hunger of all, not food or safety, but meaning, the sense that life matters, that effort is seen, that failure is not the end. And Sarah understood this because she had seen war. She had seen young soldiers lost in the desert of despair. She had buried friends whose demons won, and she vowed that no man who sought a way back would be denied. And this vow made her a leader, not in rank, but in trust. And the riders trusted her because she asked nothing for herself, no glory, no reward, only the simple joy of seeing broken men made whole. And this quiet strength drew attention from places she never imagined. A senator visited the garage promising support. A film crew arrived to make a documentary. Scholars wrote papers on the new model of restorative justice. And yet Sarah cared little for fame. She cared for the boy who now smiled, fixing a carburetor, the widow who rode safely because her bike was strong, the town that slept peacefully because its sons were no longer angry. And this is the mark of true leadership, to lift others without lifting oneself. Because of this, the Phoenix Riders flourished, spreading their chapters carefully, wisely, always grounded in service, not pride. And this grounding saved them from the curse of many movements that grow too fast and lose their soul, because Sarah and Big Mike insisted that every new group must first prove its heart, must serve its town, must heal its members before claiming the name Phoenix Rider. And this discipline protected the movement, kept it pure, kept it honest. And this honesty won even the skeptics who had doubted, who had mocked, who now donated tools and parts and time, because they saw the truth, and the truth is irresistible. And so the story reached its greatest height when the United Nations invited the Phoenix Riders to speak on the world stage, to share their lessons with nations torn by war, by gangs, by fear. And there Sarah stood in a room of leaders, quiet, calm, without anger. And she spoke of broken men, made whole, of lost boys, given craft of enemies, made brothers. In the room listened. Because her story was not theory, but life, not hope, but proof. And when she finished, there was silence and then applause, because they knew they had seen not a warrior of war, but a warrior of peace. And this moment marked the arrival of the Phoenix Riders, not as a local miracle, but as a global model. And offers came from countries near and far to learn, to share, to try this path. And so the legacy grew, not in noise, but in quiet deeds of kindness in distant lands. And this growth was the real triumph, the proof that small choices matter, that quiet courage changes more than force, And this is the lesson the world must learn, because everywhere there are broken men hungry for meaning, and everywhere there are women like Sarah willing to guide and heal and teach if we will let them. And so the story turned from victory to legacy, from moment to movement, from conflict to hope, and the world was better for it. But no story of transformation, no story of redemption is complete without its cost, without the weight of sacrifice that makes change possible. And so it was for Sarah Mitchell and the Phoenix Riders, because even as the world celebrated their example, even as nations learned from their courage, the riders themselves faced the quiet daily battle to stay true to their new path, because the old life did not release its grip easily, and temptation came in many forms. Whispers from former rivals offering old deals, promises of power, threats from gangs angry at the Phoenix Riders, betrayal of outlaw codes, and even doubt from within, when some younger members, frustrated by slow progress, wanted to take shortcuts to force respect rather than earn it. And these tensions mattered because they tested the soul of the movement, because every movement that hopes to last must pass through fire and emerge stronger. And this test came hardest when Razor, their former leader, and now the humbled builder of the new, Riders, faced a secret threat from his past, a debt unpaid to a dangerous old contact who demanded repayment in blood or silence. And this moment threatened everything. If Razor returned to violence even for a moment, the fragile trust the Phoenix Riders had built with their town, their supporters, their own families, would shatter. And Sarah knew this, and she met Razor quietly in the garage late at night as he wrestled with fear and anger and shame. And they spoke not as warrior and outlaw, but as human to human. And Sarah said the words that mattered most. Your past does not own you. Your old debts are not your future. You are free if you choose. And these words broke the chain of fear in Razor's heart, and he chose courage. He chose to confess the threat to the riders, to seek their support, not secrecy. And together they faced the danger together. They refused the old path, and in doing so they preserved the soul of the Phoenix Riders. And this moment was a turning point because it proved to every member that the new way was real strong, unbreakable. And this proof mattered deeply because the world had seen too many reform movements fall into the trap of their old ways, from revolutionaries who became tyrants to peace groups that splintered into anger to charities that lost their mission to greed. But the Phoenix Riders held fast because they remembered the diner, the humiliation, the lesson. They knew that honor once reclaimed could never be traded again, and this clarity made them stronger. And as they grew, they inspired not only bikers and veterans, but ordinary people, small business owners, who offered jobs, and training teachers who brought students to the garage to learn mechanics, and respect shopkeepers who posted signs reading Phoenix Riders. Welcome here, because the town itself had changed, no longer a place of suspicion, but of pride, because its sons and daughters had risen from shame to honor. And this quiet pride spread to nearby towns, who sent delegations to learn to copy, to start their own chapters. And soon the Phoenix Riders were not one garage, but many across the state, each led by men and women tested by pain, redeemed by purpose. And this expansion mattered because it showed that the idea was stronger than any one leader, that the spirit could outlive the founders. And this is rare in history because too often movements die with their heroes, but the Phoenix Riders lived because their secret was simple service before pride, work before words, trust before fear. And this simplicity protected them when a scandal struck a distant chapter, accused falsely of theft by a jealous rival, and the media rushed to condemn. But the writers stood calm, opened their books, invited inspection, proved their honesty, and the truth shamed the accusers and strengthened the brotherhood. And this strength attracted new allies. Police departments who once feared the writers now invited them to speak, to train, to build bridges. City councils who had banned biker events now welcomed Phoenix Rides as safe, family-friendly festivals. Veterans groups who had lost touch with younger generations now found new life through the riders, and in this way the circle of trust grew wider, safer, stronger. This mattered most for the children, the sons and daughters who now saw the riders not as threats, but as heroes who rode not to intimidate, but to protect. And these children dreamed of motorcycles of service, of honor. And this dream promised a new future, one where gangs would fade and brotherhoods of peace would rise. And this dream spread across the country and across oceans. Until one day Sarah stood again before a crowd. This time not of bikers or generals or politicians, but of young people from every background gathered for the first International Youth Peace Ride, a project born of the Phoenix Riders' example. And as Sarah spoke of courage of change, of the power of second chances, she saw in their faces the hope that would outlast her, the dream that would ride beyond her years. And this was her greatest joy to know that the seed she had planted in one moment of quiet courage in a diner had grown into a forest of peace. And this joy mattered more than any medal, more than any award, because it was real and lasting and full. And so the Phoenix Riders entered history not as saints or saviors, but as men and women who chose better and proved that even the hardest hearts could change and even the darkest roads could lead to light. And this is the lesson the world must never forget, that grace is the greatest strength, that peace is the bravest choice, and that hope is the engine that drives the future. And this future now rides on. But even as the Phoenix Riders thrived, as they opened new chapters and spread their message of redemption and renewal, Sarah Mitchell knew that the battle for hearts and minds was far from over. Because while victory in one town, one state, one movement was meaningful, the larger world beyond still wrestled with the same old demons, the same quiet fears that led young men into gangs, the same broken homes that left boys without fathers, the same weary soldiers returning from war to loneliness and confusion. And this reality was the next mountain to climb, because Sarah understood that for every man saved by the Phoenix Riders, 100 more waited in darkness, unseen. And this truth drove her and Big Mike and the other leaders to dream bigger, to build a national network of garages, training centers, safe spaces where any veteran, any lost soul could find tools and friends and purpose. And this dream began to take shape as more cities called asking for help, asking to learn, and government agencies. Once cautious, now offered grants and partnerships, and yet with this growth came danger. The danger of losing their soul, of becoming an institution, a brand instead of a brotherhood. And Sarah feared this because history teaches that movements born in fire die in bureaucracy, that purity fades when ambition grows. And so she insisted on one rule, that every new chapter must be led by the redeemed, by those who knew the darkness and chose light, because only they could teach the next lost man to walk the path. And this rule kept the Phoenix Riders honest, grounded, real. And it mattered because soon they faced their greatest test, not from rivals or enemies, but from within, when a distant chapter betrayed the code, taking corporate sponsorships, turning charity into profit, risking everything. And when this scandal broke, the media leapt eager to declare the Riders corrupt, to drag them down. But Sarah acted fast, traveled to that city, spoke with the members, challenged the leaders, and when they refused to repent, she revoked their right to the name. And this public stand shocked many, but it saved the movement because it proved that honor was greater than growth, that integrity mattered more than money. And this sacrifice inspired even their critics, who grudgingly admitted the Phoenix Riders would not sell out, would not betray their mission. And this honesty renewed the trust of their supporters and the donations of their allies and the pride of their towns. And this pride showed in every charity ride, every food drive, every toy run, where the riders brought smiles to children and hope to the poor and safety to the elderly. And this quiet service mattered more than speeches because it touched real lives. These lives told the true story of the Phoenix Riders, like Mrs. Chen, the widow whose husband, a veteran, had died alone, until the Riders rebuilt her scooter and restored her freedom and friendship, like Jerome the teenager, who almost joined a gang until Tommy taught him to fix engines and ride safe, like the town's police chief, who once feared bikers, but now called the Riders friends and partners in community patrols. These stories mattered because they proved the Riders were more than a name. They were a force for good, and this force began to shape culture as films and books told their story, as schools taught their example, as parents pointed them out to sons as proof that strength could serve not harm. And this cultural shift grew slowly, deeply, until even strangers on the highway smiled and waved when Phoenix Riders roared past, until police escorted their rides with pride, until town festivals featured their booths and workshops, and this new respect healed old wounds, broke old fears, replaced old images of menace with new images of mentors. And This healing spread to other places, to inner cities where gangs watched the riders and wondered if they too could change the suburbs, where lonely veterans called asking for chapters, to distant lands where warriors turned builders. In every place, the same truth echoed, that men need brotherhood, that purpose saves lives, that forgiveness is the strongest chain. And this truth gave Sarah and the riders strength to continue even when tired, even when afraid, because they knew they carried not just their hope, but the hope of all who dreamed of peace. And this burden was heavy but beautiful, because it made every sunrise worth rising, for every tool worth lifting, every mile worth riding. And so they rode on, always forward, always faithful, always remembering that this story was not theirs alone, but belonged to all who believed in change. And this belief kept them strong when tragedy struck, when a rider fell to illness, when an old enemy returned, when doubt whispered that the world would not change. But they rode on because they knew the truth, that change is slow but certain, that peace is fragile but real, that every life saved is a world saved. And this knowledge made them heroes, not perfect, but human, strong not in muscle, but in, brave not in rage, but in hope. And this hope carried them through every challenge, every sorrow, every threat, and into the future that waited ahead. But as the Phoenix Riders continued their quiet revolution, riding into new towns, welcoming new members, teaching new apprentices, their story began to touch places and people they had never dreamed of reaching, because what started in an American diner now whispered to souls across the globe, in places far from roaring highways or leather jackets, in quiet villages in Africa, where former child soldiers learned motorcycle repair and found pride in honest work, in crowded cities in South America, where unemployed youth turned away from crime to build bikes for delivery, in courier services in refugee camps in the Middle East, where war survivors formed riding clubs to bring supplies and hope to the displaced. And in every place, the Phoenix Riders' message was the same: not of strength, but of service, not of fear, but of dignity, not of anger, but of rebuilding. And this message mattered because it answered the hunger that all human hearts share, the hunger to belong, to matter, to heal. And this message reached even the most unlikely of ears. World leaders who once dismissed motorcycle clubs as dangerous now listen to the riders' example. Police chiefs who once profiled bikers now invited them to train young officers, military veterans in distant lands, who saw in the Phoenix Riders a way to find peace after battle. And this spreading influence carried weight at conferences, at councils, at global forums, where Sarah spoke gently, firmly, always reminding that this was not her miracle, but a shared one, born of pain. This humility made her words powerful, because the world has heard too many loud false saviors and hungers for quiet true ones. And Sarah was that, and because of her, the riders were trusted not as perfect men, but as honest ones. And this trust became action as governments funded new workshops, as charities donated tools, as media told their story with wonder and pride. And this telling mattered because the world, so full of fear, so hungry for heroes, found in the Phoenix Riders proof that change was possible, that the worst men could become the best, that the darkest past could birth the brightest future. And this hope lit fires in young hearts and old ones alike, inspiring the next generation to see bikers not as threats but as mentors, to dream not of escape into gangs, but of building into community. And this shift mattered deeply because culture shapes reality, and the riders now shaped culture, films inspired by their journey, songs that told of redemption, novels that made heroes not of warriors, but of peacemakers. And this new story slowly replaced the old one. And even the skeptics began to believe when they saw towns once divided, now united; when they saw young men once feared, now honored; when they saw Sarah and Big Mike and Razor and Tommy riding at the head of charity parades, not as symbols of fear, but of pride. And this pride mattered because it made the Phoenix Riders a permanent part of the world's moral imagination, a living example that no one is beyond saving, that every life has worth, that brotherhood can heal. And this healing spread like sunlight into every dark corner and every broken soul that reached for it. And the riders met them all with open hands and strong backs and quiet joy, because this was their calling now, to ride not for glory, but for service; not for power, but for peace. and this calling made their lives rich, full, meaningful. Every bike repaired was a future saved. Every apprentice taught was a life turned from crime. Every mile ridden was a mile of hope, and this quiet labor changed them, made them better men, made their town a better place, made their country a little kinder. And this slow miracle mattered because it lasted, because it was real, and because it taught the oldest truth of all, that goodness is not born in noise or force, but in daily small choices to love, to serve, to heal. And this truth changed not only the riders, but those who watched them, who learned from them, who copied them, until the Phoenix Riders were no longer one club, but 1,000 movements in 1,000 hearts. And this was their greatest legacy, because they had proven to the world and to themselves that peace is possible, that redemption is real, that no man, no woman, no community is too broken to rise. And this rising was their gift to the future, a gift that would outlive them, a gift that you, the viewer, could carry forward if you choose to. See if you choose to believe, if you choose to act, because the story of the Phoenix Riders does not end with them. It begins with you and with all who dare to dream of a world made new. And so as the story of the Phoenix Riders reached its quiet close, not with a bang or a final victory, but with a gentle, steady light spreading from town to town, from heart to heart, the truth at its center became clear, a truth not about bikers or veterans or garages or gang wars, but about what it means to be human, because this story was never really about motorcycles or leather jackets or diner fights. It was about the power of choice, the simple daily choices that shape who we are and what kind of world we build. Because when Sarah Mitchell stood up in that small town diner years ago, she did not intend to change the world. She did not dream of movements or fame or peace summits. She simply chose to do what was right, to protect the weak, to face injustice, to act without fear. And this one choice became the spark that lit a fire that warmed the lives of thousands. And this is the lesson the world must remember, that greatness does not begin with greatness, but with goodness, small, quiet, brave. Goodness that risks comfort to do what is needed. And this lesson matters because in every town, in every city, in every home, there are men and women and children facing their own moments of choice, to help or to ignore, to heal or to harm, to believe or to despair. And these choices build the future one brick at a time, one word at a time, one life at a time. And this truth shaped the Phoenix Riders, not because they were heroes or saints, but because they were broken men who chose to be better. They dared to hope that change was possible because they believed that even old wolves could learn new ways. And this belief transformed them, gave them purpose, gave them peace. And this peace transformed their town and their country and even the world. And this transformation is not a fairy tale. It is not fantasy. It is the slow, hard work of forgiveness, the daily grind of humility, the endless effort of service. And yet it shines brighter than any victory because it endures, and in this endurance lies hope. The hope that no man is too far gone, no mistake too great, no wound too deep to heal. And this hope is the gift the Phoenix Riders gave to us, all a gift born not of perfection, but of persistence, not of fame, but of faith, not of power, but of grace. And this grace now lives in the hearts of those they touched. The boy who learned to fix bikes instead of breaking laws, the widow who rides free instead of fearing the street, the veteran who found brotherhood again after years of loneliness. And in these lives, the writer's story continues not in headlines but in homes, not in parades but in peace, not in glory but in quiet joy. And this quiet joy is the truest treasure because it proves that love is stronger than fear, that service is greater than strength, that courage is more lasting than pride. And this proof matters more than ever. The world is full of noise, full of anger, full of division and despair, and it needs reminders like this. Reminders that goodness can grow even in hard soil, that light can rise even in the darkest night, that peace can come even to the most unlikely hearts. And this reminder is yours now because you have heard this story. You have seen its lessons, you have felt its truth, and you must carry it forward in your own life, in your own choices, in your own moments of courage. Because the future is not written by heroes on distant mountains, but by ordinary people. in ordinary places, who choose kindness over cruelty, who choose to help, not harm, who choose to build, not break. And these choices are yours every day in every word, in every glance, in every hand offered to a stranger. And if you choose well, if you choose bravely, then the spirit of the Phoenix Riders will live on, not in leather and chrome, but in compassion and care. And this world will become just a little brighter, a little kinder, a little stronger because of you. And this is the final truth of this story, that the greatest power on earth is not fear or wealth or violence, but simple, quiet goodness lived with courage, and that this goodness can change everything if we let it. And so the story ends not with final words, but with a beginning, with a challenge, with a call to rise like the phoenix from anger to peace, from division to unity, from despair to hope. And this rising is possible for you, for me, for us all, if we choose it, if we dare to believe, and if we have the courage to act. And this courage is waiting inside you. Now, as it waited inside Sarah, as it waited inside Razor and Tommy, as it waits in every lost soul longing for light, and so rise, choose, act live this truth, and let the world be changed because of you. And this is the legacy of the Phoenix Riders. This is the promise they gave. This is the hope that will never die.